Solo Leveling Arise Overdrive has the vibe of a project born to capitalize on the franchise's hype, but at the same time, it tries to deliver something more polished than a mere mobile spin-off. Just by following everything that has been released and testing the demo, you can tell that the team is committed to making an action RPG that goes beyond the basics, focusing heavily on the feeling of evolution and power that is the heart of the manhwa. The combat is fast, full of effects, and I enjoyed how each hit makes you feel Jinwoo's transformation, that vibe of growing and dominating, which fans expect so much. The visual is really another highlight. Using a darker palette, with fluid animations in the shadow powers, the devs nailed creating a tense atmosphere that you don't see every day in adaptations of this type. Playing the demo, you could see that behind the graphics, there is a concern to replicate the tone of the webtoon, from the architecture of the dungeons to the design of the monsters. It's not just beautiful, but consistent with the universe that inspired the game, which always excites those who already follow the story. The focus on accessibility is also clear. The controls are direct and the tutorials don't drag on. Instead of trapping you in long explanations, the game immediately goes to the action, which I prefer, especially when I already know the premise. I felt that the developers are aiming at an audience that wants to feel the power right away, without much bureaucracy. On the other hand, this makes the demo a bit shallow for those who like narrative details, so I hope they expand this aspect in the future. I like the idea of cooperative raids and multiplayer modes, even though in the demo it seems like an implementation in the initial phase. The attempt to create a community is clear, and although there is still a lack of variety, the base is there for those who like to play in groups and form strategies. My personal fear is that some pay-to-win aspect will end up getting in the way, something always present in gacha and Korean titles of this size. Hopefully it will remain balanced. The pace of development was well directed to ride the success of the anime, but I didn't feel cheap manipulation. The demo runs smoothly. I didn't see any serious bugs, and I admire how they invested in performance for intense combat, especially considering that they transitioned from mobile to PC and console. However, after a few hours, the game already shows signs of repetition in the dungeon portals and missions, which shows that they need to invest more in variety to keep everyone playing for a long time. I really like the care with the localization for English and other languages. Menus, dialogues, everything is accessible for those who don't know Korean. This shows respect for the global audience and a desire to expand. It gives the impression that the team really follows the worldwide fandom, taking feedback and adapting. I just didn't like that in the demo the story is almost ignored. That narrative spice that made solo leveling boom is missing. The impression is of a game made for fans, with action techniques that make character evolution irresistible. But there is still that shadow of doubt about how much they will expand in diversity and depth. The feeling after playing is of having participated in an intense episode, but a bit too fast. I hope that in the full release they will give space for more exploration, narrative, and less repetitive gameplay. Solo Leveling Arise Overdrive, from what has been released and from what my experience with the demo allowed me to perceive, maintains the central focus on the story of the original manhwa, which is basically the journey of Sung Jin-woo, an initially weak hunter who, after a mysterious experience, gains the ability to level up in a unique way. This premise is what drives the entire narrative of the game, and from what can be seen, the development strives to deliver the feeling of constant growth, which is the heart of the saga. The game doesn't innovate much in the story, but relies on the strength of the already known plot to attract fans. In the demo, the narrative is told in a more minimalist way, focusing more on the gameplay than on dialogues or long cutscenes. This left me with the impression that the game wants the story to be absorbed in a more interactive and less passive way, which has its merit, but may leave out those who seek more character development or more context about the world. The feeling I had is of playing the action chapter and less the personal drama of Jin-woo, as in the manhwa. The game, from what I understood from what has been shared so far, does not delve much into the secondary characters or the factions that permeate the universe of solo leveling, focusing practically only on the protagonist and his growing power. For those who like intense narrative with multiple layers, this may be a disappointment. But for those who want to feel the weight of Jin-woo's transformation and his battles against monsters, the focus of the story works well. It also caught my attention that the story seems to be being adapted to fit a game-friendly format. That is, short episodes and clear objectives, which favors the rhythm of the game, but limits the development of more complex arcs, mainly because the game is designed to be repetitive and focused on the grind. This creates a type of narrative that works more as a backdrop for the action than as a main element. Another point I noticed is that the demo and the released material do not show much about the emotional impact or moral dilemmas of the character, something present in the webtoon in key moments. This may make the plot colder or more mechanical, but at the same time keeps the focus on what many gamers are looking for: action and constant progress. Personally, I thought there was a lack of that dramatic load that makes the manhwa so engaging. The story in the game also has some small expansions or parallel events, such as missions related to guilds and epic battles against bosses. But all this still seems to be very linked to the basic premise without major narrative surprises. The impression I had is that the development team chose to hold back a little the expansion of the lore to ensure that the main target audience, fans of the manhwa, is satisfied with the basics, while testing the ground for something bigger in the future. For those who only saw what was released and played the demo, the story of Overdrive is faithful to the original, but quite simplified and focused on maintaining the intense rhythm and progression that the manhwa offers. I felt that the game chose to deliver a narrative that supports the gameplay without great epic pretensions, betting on the popularity of the saga to captivate fans who want to live the experience of level up of Jinwoo in practice, more than delving into complex plots or surprising twists. This has its merits, but also limits the narrative potential. Overdrive seemed to me initially a very promising proposal in gameplay, especially for those who know the manhwa and expect to feel in their skin the frantic evolution of Jinwoo. The demo I played showed an action RPG game with dynamic combat, where intuitive control is a great asset. From the start, you can see that the development team focused a lot on delivering a fluidity that keeps the player always active, using blows, dodges, and special abilities quickly, which fits well with the profile of the audience looking for immediate action. One of the points that pleased me most was the feeling of constant progression, which is essential in a game like this. The construction of the skills and the feeling of evolution are really well done. Each new technique that you learn or improve brings that click of power growing, something that fans of the webtoon will recognize as the essence of the original plot. The demo makes this clear with a skill tree that offers interesting choices, although it is not so complex, keeping the gameplay accessible without losing depth. Visually, the gameplay benefits a lot from the visual effects that emulate the shadow and power of Jinwoo, which makes the fights not only challenging, but also a visual spectacle for those who care about style. However, this strong visual footprint also gives the feeling that the game bets heavily more on the shine than on variety of mechanics, at least in what has been made available so far. This is a concern that remains in the air, especially if we consider the duration of the demo, which after a few repetitive hours can be tiring. Another aspect that I liked was the clear attempt to balance melee actions with the strategic use of shadows and ranged powers, creating a rhythm that varies between direct aggressiveness and moments of quick planning during combat. Several players have reported, including that the response of the commands is responsive and that the challenge increases coherently with the progression, which gives the feeling that the development took seriously the feedback from the community in the initial phases. The demo also brought cooperative multiplayer modes that, although still basic, add a layer that can be very interesting for those who like games with social interaction, raids, and group battles. This is an area where the game still needs to evolve, but the base, however, exists and demonstrates that the developers want to extend the longevity of the title beyond the solo journey, something that I personally value a lot. Despite the qualities, it is impossible to ignore some limitations presented in the demo. The repetition of some phases, enemies, and layouts are evident, and this harms the rhythm of the gameplay in the long term, leaving the experience a little mechanical. For what it promises, it would be interesting for Netmarble to work more on diversity and varied challenges to prevent the game from suffering from the same evil that many action RPGs end up having, which is monotony after the novelty factor. My general feeling when playing the demo of Solo Leveling Arise Overdrive is that we have a game with a lot of potential in gameplay, especially for being able to capture the spirit of the manhwa in what concerns the feeling of power and evolution, but that still needs to prove itself in terms of varied content and depth to keep players engaged for longer. The development, from what could be seen, is focused on fast action and visual spectacle, elements that work well for an initial experience, but that need to be accompanied by improvements to not become limiting in the full release. The game presents graphics that caught my attention for the combination of stylized style with high visual quality. The choice of cell shading not only reinforces the connection with the visual of the manhwa, but also helps to create its own identity, more vibrant and clean, that escapes the heavy realism that could weigh on less powerful machines. This pleased me because it brings a charm that is both modern and faithful to the origin of the franchise. The highlight for the shadows and light effects was something that impressed me a lot playing. The way the shadows are projected and Jinwoo's attacks are visibly represented in combat gives a sense of intense power, almost as if the game was illustrating the impact of the blows. It is clear that there was a care with the visual effects so that they do not hinder the gameplay. They are always well positioned and add immersion without confusing the player. When exploring the scenarios, I noticed that the environments have a good variety of textures and details, although the demo has not shown a huge diversity in this aspect. The design of dungeons and dark areas combines well with the atmosphere of the Solo Leveling universe, bringing that gothic and mysterious touch. I felt that the development team invested to make these environments seem dark, threatening, but accessible for the player to orient themselves and enjoy the action. The animation of the characters was also another point that caught my attention. The movement of Jinwoo and the enemies is fluid, with transitions that seem natural, and the special attacks have elaborate animations that value the charisma of the protagonist. From what I saw, the demo conveyed a sense of more agile and stylized combat, which helps to avoid that feeling of rigidity common in many action RPGs. In the graphic performance, I felt that the game knows how to dose very well the visual appeal, without sacrificing frames or having sharp drops during the most moving scenes. This is essential to maintain the immersive experience, especially in battles with many enemies and simultaneous effects, where some games end up crashing. The demo withstands these moments well, which left me with good expectations for the full game. Despite the positive points, I consider that the demo showed a slight space for improvements in the visual diversity of the phases. The scenarios reappear with little structural variation, which can end up passing a feeling of graphic repetition, even with the care in the details presented. For those who value exploration, it would be nice to see more variety and environments that show different facets of the world of Solo Leveling. My opinion about the graphics of Solo Leveling Arise Overdrive is that they managed to deliver a strong and striking visual, with its own identity and beautiful technical execution. The stylized style works in favor of the game, balancing aesthetic appeal and performance, and the animations reinforce very well the intense atmosphere of the battles. The expectation is that this graphic quality is maintained, with a little more diversity in scenarios to avoid that the visual becomes monotonous in the final release. Overdrive, from what I could observe in the demo and in the official materials, presents a surprisingly robust performance for an action RPG title so visually loaded. The fluidity of the combat animations, even with multiple enemies and special abilities activated, remained stable, which is a crucial point to keep the player immersed. In the demo, I noticed that the developers invested a lot in the balance between graphic quality and optimization, especially to run well both on intermediate PCs and on consoles, which is a great asset for the overall experience. Personally, I was satisfied with the responsiveness of the game during the fights. The input lag was practically non-existent, which is fundamental for games that depend on reflexes and accurate timing, as is the case here. This shows care from the team in ensuring that the technical performance did not hinder the immersion or the feeling of the gameplay, something not always guaranteed in webtoon adaptations for game. The demo worked very well even in prolonged sessions, which reinforces this focus of the developers on stability. Another aspect that caught my attention was the graphic consistency during the loading of dungeons and bosses. The transition was smooth, without noticeable drops in frame rate, even with heavy visual effects and fast movements. I believe that the game employs a good optimization of hardware resources to maintain the frantic rhythm of the battles without sacrificing the aesthetics. For me, this is a clear demonstration that performance was a priority in the development. Despite the demo being relatively short, I did not notice problems of overheating or excessive consumption of resources in more modest machines, at least those that I could test. This favors, for example, players who do not have state-of-the-art setups, increasing access to the game at launch. This concern with broad performance suggests that the team wanted to expand the reach of the game without sacrificing visual fidelity or gameplay. However, I felt a small limitation in the variety of scenarios presented, which may impact the perception of visual freshness in the long term, but this is not so related to performance as to design. In the demo, there were no bugs or crashes, which gives a good initial impression. But obviously only the full release will tell if this pattern will be maintained with more extensive content. The performance in multiplayer, where the processing can be more demanding, is still an unknown, since the demo presented only basic modes with few simultaneous players. My expectation, based on what I saw, is that the game will support well these cooperative sessions. But it will be important to follow the evolution and feedback of the community to be sure. My impression about the performance of Overdrive, considering what was released and the demo I played, is positive and encouraging. The game runs with great fluidity, presents stability, and maintains graphic quality without sacrificing the gameplay, which guarantees a good initial experience for fans and new players. Now, the challenge will be to maintain this performance with the complete and more populous content that will come with the official release. For those who are thinking about buying Solo Leveling Arise Overdrive at launch, my opinion is that it is worth it for those who are already fervent fans of the manhwa or the solo leveling universe in general. The game delivers fast and satisfying action, puts you directly in the skin of Jinwoo, and has that addictive feeling of constant evolution that fans love. Therefore, if you want to relive the story with an engaging gameplay and striking visual, buying at launch can be a very pleasant experience. However, for players who value a lot of varied content and more developed narrative, I would recommend some caution and even wait a little longer to see how the game evolves with updates. The demo showed that the title still has its limitations, especially in terms of diversity of missions, story, and game modes. If you are not familiar with the manhwa, this initial version may seem a little shallow, narratively, and with a repetitive rhythm in the gameplay. It is also worth noting that for players who enjoy action RPGs with a more refined difficulty and deep systems, Overdrive may not be ideal right away. It brings a more accessible experience, made to be fluid and fast, which pleases those who do not want to waste time with complex menus and want to get into the action quickly. If you like a more technical and challenging game, perhaps the best bet is to wait for final reviews to understand how the end of development treated these aspects. The game is clearly indicated for fans of the franchise, who will enjoy every visual and narrative detail that makes direct reference to the manhwa and the anime. It is also attractive for those who like action games with light RPG elements and constant progression. If you identify with this footprint and like games that mix stylized combat with character evolution without much complication, you are likely to get a lot out of the release. On the other hand, those looking for a robust multiplayer since the launch should keep an eye on future updates, since the demo revealed that these modes are still in an initial and little developed stage. Therefore, if your preference is to play with friends and expect more complex cooperative or competitive modes, perhaps waiting a little longer makes sense to ensure a more complete experience. In terms of cost-benefit, my feeling is that the game delivers visual, action, and fan service of quality to justify the purchase at launch, but may not surprise those who are expecting innovation or a lot of variety in the content right at the beginning. Given that the demo has repetitive points, waiting for feedback from the community, and updates may be the best way to ensure that the investment is worth it in the long term. If you are a fan of the franchise and want to feel the growing power of Jinwoo with a fluid gameplay and well-achieved graphics, it is worth buying Solo Leveling Arise Overdrive at launch. If you are looking for more narrative depth, variety of content, and mature multiplayer modes, it is better to wait a few months, check reviews and updates to have a more complete experience.
끝내주지! 끝내주지. 반격의 시간이다. 바람보다 빠르게.